Good evening, y'all. How are y'all doing tonight? I have been having a pretty good week so far because this week I am on vacation and I got recommended a great vacation spot. Since I've been traveling and studying a lot for the past couple weeks around the galaxy, I decided to take spring break early and I'm headed off to a new planet and I've never seen anything like this new planet before. Hey y'all, and welcome to Oblivion's Library. I'm Haley Straub, your host and intergalactic traveler, exploring the galaxy, collecting stories, and for the first time today, I'm also on Instagram Live. Currently nobody is watching, but hopefully people will see that and want to join. Today, I am on a planet called Hertagia, which has some of the most interesting culture I've seen yet. In terms of technology, Hertagia doesn't have electricity yet, so they primarily use natural gas and coal and steam to power things. It's the closest thing to what we Earthlings would call steampunk. You see, there was a war recently on Hertagia, and by recently I mean like over 30 years ago, that wiped out a significant chunk of the planet's population. And to get their planet's society restarted, Hertagia built several cities and focused their social and technological efforts on those cities, the biggest and brightest of which is Memoriam City. Memoriam is built of copper and gears, and today's story takes place in Memoriam City. Because even though they don't have electricity, they have technology that we on Earth can only dream of. This story is owned and copyrighted by Haley Straub. This story is not affiliated with Taylor University and may not necessarily reflect the views of the institution. All stories on this podcast are PG and LTC friendly. Today's story is called Once Again in Memoriam. And it begins with a character who is just as new to this world as we are. The sun bypassed the curtains completely and glared so brightly off the copper windowsill that it woke her up. She sat up in bed and took in the drafty room smothered in teal wallpaper, an unfamiliar room. "Finally, you're awake." A woman with black hair peered down at her from the top bunk. "You're a lot heavier than you look. I couldn't get you up here to your bunk, so I'll let you have mine. You need an extra fan up here." The woman climbed down the bunk bed and grabbed a pile of folded clothes. "Well, let's get this song and dance over with. Do you know your name, or where we are?" The girl tried to answer her, but something was wrong. Everything was fuzzy in her mind. When she tried to think about who she was, or how she'd fallen asleep, or what she'd done over the past few days, she drew a blank, like grasping at wind. In a second of panic, she laid back down and threw the covers over herself. She shuddered with fear of the unknown, at everything that was unknown. She didn't remember anything. A minute later, the woman with the black hair tore the covers away. She had changed into a fitted black Victorian-style suit jacket that hung over her white blouse and suspenders. With her laced-up boots and leather gloves, the woman wore black from head to toe, offset by oxidized copper jewelry. The woman in black rolled her eyes. "Seriously, that's the third time this month." She turned to the mirror and began tying up her hair. "Maybe the reason you never retain any advice, Zora Stilver, is because you never keep your own memory long enough for it to sink in, and I'm sick of explaining things to you every time you get amnesia." The girl in the bed hesitantly sat up. This had happened before. Strangely, the feeling of unfamiliarity felt somewhat familiar. Zora. Was that her name? It felt like her name. The woman in black tossed a crumpled pile of white fabric onto Zora's lap. "Get dressed. We have work." Zora, dressed in the regal white and bronze clothes, rushed to follow the woman in black out the door and down the copper-plated hallway. Their boots clicked on the hollow floor, made of thinned-down wood. Around the dormitory walls, other women were dressed in bright monochrome colors, in skirts and jackets, and stood chatting and waiting for the elevators. Vaguely, a spark flickered in Zora's mind when she glanced around at the women. She recognized some of their faces, but couldn't recall their names. The woman in black had put on a pair of sunglasses and didn't make eye contact with anyone, and she walked too fast to answer Zora's protests and questions. When the copper elevator arrived with the swish of steam and the clank of gears, someone was already inside. It was a middle-aged woman in a navy blue outfit, her eyes as bronze as the brooches on her collar. As the elevator began to descend, the woman in navy wearily rubbed her head. "Good morning, Zora. Morning, Shades. I feel awful after last night, but the center won't run itself." She glanced at Zora with firm, tired eyes. "What's the diagnosis?" Zora glanced at the woman in black, Shades, apparently, who leaned against the elevator rail. Her sunglasses hid her expression, but Zora couldn't help but feel belittled. Shades was intimidating. What else could it be with Zora? Full-on amnesia. Again. Once again. I'm starting to reconsider my life choices. Just another day in Memoriam, the woman in navy laughed. Zora, I'm Director Carnegie, head of the Memory Center. You and Shades both work here. The elevator slowed to a stop at the lobby, where Zora glanced up at the balconies extending over the central shaft. There were dozens of floors to this memory center, with a skylight at the ceiling. Wooden floors, orange copper railings, and teal paneling continued the theme throughout the lobby. Stairways and bridges that connected different balconies high above were held up by rickety scaffolding. From the ground, Zora could see different balconies containing cafes, libraries, lounges, and landings. Zora stood on the patterned wood floor and craned her neck upwards, unknowingly turning in circles. Windows on every floor lit the place with natural light, although the skies outside were cloudy and gray today. Shades and Carnegie were talking a short distance away. Zora didn't pay attention until Carnegie called to her. Hey, Zora, just stick with Shades here. There's a lot going on right now, but she'll keep you safe, and she'll fill you in on everything else. Zora glanced at Shades, who hiked her foot up on a bench to tie her shoelace. It hadn't been obvious before, but instead of a skirt, Shades was actually wearing wide-legged pantaloons. Zora was skeptical and still a bit intimidated. I don't think she likes me. Carnegie chuckled. You always say that. Trust me, you'll warm up to her. I'll check in on you later. Shades nodded her head aside and silently led Zora up the maze of copper staircases to the third floor. When Zora entered the tidy office, she instantly recognized its smell of cut wood. There were their desks, Shades' the tidy ebony one by the door, and Zora's the ivory heap of paperwork in the corner. In the third corner sat a coffee table and a padded clawfoot sofa. Opposite the door, the wall was covered with tiny filing cabinet drawers. Shades dropped a heavy white book on Zora's desk. Not all your memories are gone, just the flashiest ones. And since memory loss is an occupational hazard in this line of work, Carnegie makes everyone keep scrapbooks. Read up. Zora sat at her desk and pried open the scrapbook, catching the photographs that tried to blow away. She recognized her own handwriting, scribbled in the margins and around the photographs, haphazardly pasted in, and she even remembered writing some of them. Shades is a friend. Trust her. I had a tea party with my friends today. Carthage's show, Saturday, 6 o'clock. Every now and then, a line was drawn straight across the page with the message, I've got amnesia once again. I've got amnesia once again. I've got amnesia once again. Each followed up with different explanations. Hey, Shades, who's this scruffy-haired boy in all these photographs? That's your brother, Carthage Stover, Shades rattled off. He's 4 years older than you and works at the Tinker Center. Call him later. He likes to know you're all right after losing your memory again. The most recent page included photographs of Zora with a woman wearing a red-orange dress in most pictures. But past Zora had scratched out her face in every photo. The margins included messages like, don't trust her, and she's delusional. Who was this woman? Did Zora know her? They appeared to be on good terms in the photos. What had happened? Shades, what happened to my memories? Zora asked. And how did I lose them? This time, at least. Shades strided over to the coffee table and flipped a switch. The table strained on its gears as it collapsed upward against the wall. Beneath it was a shallow pool of chalky liquid. Here at the Memory Center, people come to us and we extract and store memories. Then people come back whenever they want to relive them. Shades rummaged through the wall of filing cabinets and took a small capsule from one of them. This is a memory capsule. It stores a memory inside exactly how the host remembers it, and it can be reviewed with this pool of memory solution. She dropped the capsule into the pool, where it dissolved and turned the water dusty blue. Zora sneered. No way am I getting in that. With one motion, Shades pushed Zora in. As soon as Zora's head hit the water, she was launched into a dream. The world reformed around her, and she watched a scene play out like a moving picture reel. In the memory, Zora and Shades sat quietly at their desks in their office. The world looked the same as the present day. A knock at the door. It's open, Shades called. A man in a purple suit with scruffy hair peeked in. and Zora smiled as she moved around her desk to greet him. "Carthage, I didn't know you were coming by today." Her brother nodded a stiff greeting to Shades and sat with Zora on the clawfoot sofa. "I got out of my meeting early, and I had to tell you, Zora, I've got the most incredible commission of my life today. I'm going to be building a steamless engine." Shades tilted her head. "Is that related to the steam engine?" "It's a steam engine that doesn't run on steam," Carthage explained excitedly. He described how the locomotive would be used to get to other cities without coal, instead running on manpower and using systems of pulleys and gears. "Obviously, there's still a lot of things to work out," he said, "like how many people we'll need to run the prototype engine and how to fit them all in the tight space, specifically." "Could you train animals to do it?" Zora suggested. "That could take up less space." Carthage blinked. "Potentially, but what animals are smart enough to drive a train?" Shade sighed heavily and took off her sunglasses. "Ugh, memory monsters. That's what you want. Hate those little rascals, but they're sharp as a tack." "Interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a memory monster. What do they look like?" "No one knows," Zora pointed out. "They mess with your head. As soon as you look away from them, you forget what they look like." "But Shades doesn't trust them?" "Nah, I don't like them," Shades corrected. "But if they're your cup of tea, don't let me shatter it. I mean, I know they're essential for what we do here in the Memory Center, but I have dreamed about strangling one multiple times. Multiple times." Her last line echoed a few times. The office's pastel wallpaper faded away, and the area reformed into another memory. In this scene, Zora led Carthage and Shades down a tight spiral staircase, thick with teal rust. Her lantern was just bright enough to outline every bar of the walls of cages stacked upon cages that lined the dark hallway. Sounds of chirping came from within the cages, and their shadowy inhabitants inched away from the light. In the darkness, a woman in a frilly red-orange dress with a cage skirt tossed food scraps between the bars. She glanced around from under her large hat, and the lantern glittered in her eyes. "Zora, is that you? Glad to see you. Who else is there?" "Shades is here along with my brother." Zora perched the lantern on a cage. "Carthage, this is Elusive Holloway. She works down here in the dark, training the center's memory monsters." "That's right." Holloway smiled shyly. "Meet my pets." The memory monsters looked like timid house cats, using their wings to fly and creep around the cage walls. Their void-black fur was so thick it was impossible to tell creature from shadow, making them appear as two blinking eyes in the shadowy void. "Ever walk into a room and forget why you came in there?" Holloway questioned. "That's because a memory monster bit you. They steal memories when they bite, and their saliva makes the memory capsules we use in the center. Their only real weakness is light. They can't stand it. Lanterns are the brightest we ever get down here." In the dim light, Shades had to take off her sunglasses to see. A memory monster hissed at her, and she hissed back. "You're not getting any meals out of me, so cry about it." Carthage introduced his steamless engine design to Holloway, explaining how the memory monsters could be trained to turn gears and push valves for the conductor. Holloway nodded along, her eyes intrigued. "My little shadow shifters would love that. They hate being cooped up in here all day." She glanced around the walls of cages. "I think I could be your next conductor, Carthage. Let's talk more. Talk more." The scene blurred together, and another memory took shape in another time. Carthage was gone, but Shades and Zora were back in the cages, along with Director Carnegie. This was Carnegie's memory. In this memory, at a much later date than the last one, the door to every cage in the dark hallway hung wide open. Memory monsters creeped and flew around everywhere, chirping so loudly, and they all centered around a dark figure at the end of the hall. Holloway was unrecognizable. Her copper clothes had been exchanged for teal and gray, and she sat among the cages, her hair tangled and frizzed, with dark circles drooping beneath her crazed eyes. Her legs were locked around a wooden bucket filled with strange liquid, and memory monsters brushed up against her as she stirred and stirred and stirred. A memory monster bit Carnegie's arm and pounced over to Holloway, who took the ensuing memory capsule from its mouth and held it close to read. "Carnegie, you were honored to be picked to run the Memory Center." She took another capsule. Zora, your brother gave you a ride on his new train. What pleasant memories. I'll enjoy these. She dropped the capsules into the bucket, and they dissolved in the sandy black water. The only one unaffected by the bites of the memory monsters was Shades. When Zora questioned her about it, she shrugged deliberately. Good memories are tasty to these shadowy things, but I don't have good memories. I have trauma, and that stays outside my head where it belongs. Carnegie waved her lantern to fend off the shadows around her. If it wasn't clear, Holloway, you're fired. I turned my back for 1 second and you ravaged the memory center. Your memory monsters took bites out of every worker here. You know better than anyone. That's a death sentence. But Holloway shrugged. Don't remember it? Wasn't me. Exasperated, Zora growled. I know amnesia hits hard the first time round, but that's no excuse. Why'd you do it? What do you want? Holloway's head snapped up, her eyes laughing with desperation. What do I want? What does anyone ever want? Peace of mind, stability, context. And ever since the incident that I can't remember, I haven't had any knowledge of who I am or where I came from. Don't you know what it's like, Zora? To feel empty, to feel hollow inside. Oh, I know all about feeling empty inside, Zora said dangerously, her lantern shaking in her hand. I should know. I'm the klutz who loses her memory every few weeks, and it hurts. I know it hurts. But you can't use others' memories to fill the void in your own head. Holloway stopped stirring her bucket. Wrong, because I still remember how to control my memory monsters, and they only get me the memories I want. I only collected good memories. Good, happy memories. No regrets, no embarrassing moments, no bad news. I can pick and choose my own past. And Holloway upturned the bucket on her head, and the chalky black liquid dripped down her hair and blouse. Among her tangled and sticky strands of hair, Holloway smiled, an insane, successful smile of desperate bliss. I love my life. Carnegie gripped a bar of a cage next to her, watching Holloway empathetically. Look, nobody's life is perfect, Holloway. You may recall those new memories inside your head, but doesn't it bother you at all that they're fake? Relationships are fake, Holloway spat, grabbing the sides of the cages around her to drag herself to her feet. Emotion is fake. Truth is fake. Memory itself is an illusion, Carnegie. I'd gladly live in a fantasy if it meant being happy. Shades blinked. Holloway, how long has it been since you slept? Sleep? I hardly know her. Holloway tripped on her skirts as she approached Zora. It's not enough. I feel so desperate, so lost. I don't even know what I don't know. I can't just not know anything. I need more memories. Zora, look out! Shades screamed. Holloway whistled through her teeth, and memory monsters rushed towards Zora like a wave of shadow. The memory went pitch black. And Zora sat up in the pool of memory solution, gasping for air. The office was bright and quiet. Shades and Director Carnegie stared down at her. And that was yesterday, Shades finished in the real world. Zora sat in the chalky water for a moment, trying to process what she'd seen, trying to remember it from her own perspective. That lady, Holloway. Zora had known her. They'd been work friends before all this. Had she really gone from chill to insane? So the feeling of emptiness had driven Holloway to insanity. Holloway certainly had an interesting response to amnesia, one Zora had never considered. Stealing others' memories. While a choose-your-own-past sounded incredible, Zora decided she'd rather have the truth. And in Zora's mind, when she tried to think about the memory monsters, there were gaps in her memory where the creatures should be. She really couldn't remember what they looked like. Basically, Holloway forgot to feed her memory monsters one day, Shades continued. They got so hungry that when she did show up to feed them, they bit all the memories out of her instead. She's handling amnesia much worse than you normally do, and yet she can still control her memory monsters just fine. Zora stepped out of the pool and shook her skirts dry. As much as she was mad about being attacked, she understood where Holloway was coming from. Zora hated the fog in her own head, and more than anything, she wanted to know the context about her own life. Holloway just had a more surefire and illegal way of filling in the gaps. Holloway's fled with her memory monsters. They haven't come back to the cages, Carnegie sighed. I've just put her under arrest. It pains me. I wish we could talk to her. But she has a terrible advantage, able to make anyone who sees her forget she was even there. So I got the whole city of Memoriam looking for the raving amnesiac with an army of shadows. Carnegie rubbed her sleeves. I can't help but feel this is all my fault somehow. Zora was overwhelmed, connecting the memories she'd seen to what fragments she remembered and trying to figure out what went where. As her scrapbook pointed out, she'd bounced back from this empty feeling before. But Zora remembered the memory monsters, whatever they looked like, biting Shades and getting nothing from it. And she asked Shades about that. Beneath her cool exterior, Shades was unruffled. Oh, that? I don't have good memories. At least not the character-building kind. But that's not important and I don't care. We need to worry about you right now. The telephone on Zora's desk rang with a shrill whistle. Shades cranked the lever to lower the coffee table over the pool, as Zora unhooked the earpiece and held up the copper receiver. The call was from Zora's brother Carthage, who was inquiring after Zora's mental state. Zora flipped through her scrapbook to find a good picture of him. Zora, something's wrong. You and Shades need to come over here right now. Come here? Where's here? The Tinker Center. Carthage talked away from the phone receiver, then came back. There's a lady here. No matter how much I ask what her name is, she keeps insisting she's you. I think she was the memory monster lady. They are everywhere around my workshop. This made Zora burn with resentment. Stealing her memories and identity theft was one thing. Stealing her brother was something else. From her desk, Shades was shamelessly listening into the conversation on her own telephone line. Well, that's gotta be Holloway. But why would she try to hide in the Tinker Center? Because of Carthage? That's unwise, real unwise of her. Carnegie shrugged. She knows she can't hide in this city forever. I speculate she'll try to run. Shades scoffed. Tuh, good luck with that. Everyone's looking for her. It's not like she can just hop a train. Zora sharply inhaled, something clicking in her brain. Train. The steamless engine that Carthage has been working on. He wanted the memory monsters to operate it. She'll try to leave the city on that, unless she's forgotten about that too. Carnegie's jaw dropped, and she went pale. Memories bitten out by memory monsters aren't permanent. The missing pieces eventually get patched up in your head. It's been a few days. She likely remembers that by now. She's there for the train. She's going to get out. Zora clenched her skirt in her fist and raised the receiver again. Carthage? Yeah, I've got amnesia once again. Elusive Holloway stole my memories, and now she thinks she's me. Keep her there. Don't let her get on your prototype train. Shades and I will be there as soon as we can. She threw the telephone down and grabbed her coat on the way out the door. I can go by myself. I'm pretty sure I remember the way. But Shades appeared behind her, her hat already on her head. Nope, I'm going with you. She led the way down the stairs, without giving Zora time to argue. The city of Memoriam was built from copper, wood, and steel. It was a crowded, industrial sort of society in which no one went outside without a hat. Women in ruffled dresses strolled down the streets arm in arm with men in top hats. Hot steam from pipes and ventilation shafts blew in the breeze, mixing with the cold salt air from the sea. Zora and Shades took the clanking trolley bus to the architectural disaster known as the Tinker Center. It sat at the outskirts of Memoriam City, by the scrapyard. The Tinker Center's uneven towers of bronze scaffolding and tin siding were rustic but sturdy. Unlike the rest of the city, the Tinker Center didn't care about its appearance. The building had been tinkered on just as much as the inventions it held. The Tinker Center dealt with the inventing and repairing of various things for the good of the city. Even in the heat of the day, sounds of welding and hammering echoed through the walls. But as they rushed up the center's front steps, Shades hesitated. Sorry, Zora. I wanted to come with you to protect you, 'cause you're vulnerable right now, and to make sure you actually got here. But you probably forgot that I'm banned from the Tinker Center. I take another step, and my job's at stake. You're banned from here, Shades? Why? For reasons. Shades glanced away. Reasons that I may or may not have spent time in prison for. I'll fill you in on that later. But I left someone alone at the wrong time, and bad things happened because of it. The Tinker Center's director wanted to make sure I never forgot it, so I'm banned for life. Zora glanced between Shades and the Tinker Center's bronze door. She swallowed hard. Holloway was in there. What if she attacked again? Could Zora even survive something like that? Were the memories that important? I can trust you, Shades. I don't know if I can trust anyone else. Everything still feels too new. You can trust Carthage, just find him, Shades assured her. Hey, but Zora, there's 2 reasons people come to the memory center. Either to store their good memories for safekeeping, or extract their bad memories for some peace of mind. Memories good enough to be stolen are a blessing. Take it from someone who ignores the past by regularly forgetting about it. Your memories, good or bad, make you who you are, so either get your memories or don't, and fall apart like Holloway has. 'Cause either way, we have to go to work tomorrow. Zora smirked, somehow recognizing Shade's familiar deadpan spark. Nervously, Zora continued up the steps. Zora remembered just enough to recognize the turns and twists through the workshops, and she managed to find her brother's shed close to the tracks. Carthage's dirt-floored workshop was cluttered with in-progress tinkering projects, the largest of which was the steamless engine, a large locomotive perched on its tracks under the steel portico. The room was empty except for Carthage and Holloway. She still wore her limp teal and gray dress, just as intimidating as she had been in the memories Zora had viewed. The creatures that Zora assumed were memory monsters brushed against her like shadowy cats, unnaturally darkening the room. Zora waited behind a workbench to watch Holloway and Carthage from a distance. Let's play a game. Holloway walked around the great metal locomotive in a wide arc, her shifting shadow pets perched around her. The game's called How Does This Cranking Chunk of Hardware Move? Nervously, Carthage grabbed a piece of copper pipe from a workbench and shook it, mixing the liquids inside. It glowed a sharp neon orange, and the memory monsters squealed as they shied away from it. You're still recovering from amnesia, Zora. You're in no condition to drive a train, and the steamless engine is still in a testing phase. Holloway kicked the locomotive wheel stubbornly. I don't remember how this thing works. Good thing I know who does. She whistled, and the memory monsters inched toward Carthage. He fended them off with his neon light as Holloway hiked up her skirts and clambered up the side of the train. Zora ran up to Carthage just as a memory monster knocked the light out of his hand. A small swarm of them jumped on his shoulders and arms, and she swatted them off, and the shadows rushed to meet their master on the train. The Stilver siblings took a minute to confirm that they recognized each other. Carthage was unharmed, and his memory was mostly untouched, except for all information about his prized steamless engine. When Zora pressured him, he didn't even remember he had built it. There is one thing I remember, Carthage pondered, but it's really humiliating. If it's a humiliating memory, Holloway won't have taken it. She's only after the good stuff. What about the train is humiliating? He was interrupted by the steamless engine's whistle shrieking over them. The locomotive wasn't much more than a metal skeleton, but even so, Carthage had already installed a whistle. Holloway leaned haphazardly out the conductor's box, putting her full weight on the whistle rope. Whatever she yelled was covered up by the shrill of the horn. The shadowy memory monsters creeped over every inch of the copper train, crawling into every crevice. The gears strained and began to turn. The valves whooshed, and slowly but surely the giant machine began to inch along the track. The memory monsters were operating it perfectly. Carthage grabbed Zora's arm. The only thing I remember about that train was the embarrassing reason it hasn't advanced past a prototype. The last time we tried memory monsters running it, they did excellent in the dark. But when the train hit daylight, they scattered because memory monsters can't stand the light. The test was a complete fail, and our investors were watching the whole thing. He buried his face in his hands. But Zora bolted for the train, managing to swing up to the conductor's box before it picked up speed. Holloway growled at her as the train maneuvered through the dim tin sheds of the Tinker Center, lazily following along its track. Zora froze, gripping the side of the conductor's box. Holloway was terrifying, but underneath that terrifying insanity were Zora's own memories. Zora got the implication that, in a way, she was looking in a mirror. "Get out of here, imposter!" Holloway sneered. "I'm Zora Stilver now. Get used to it!" I'm glad you're happy, but you can't be me. I'm already Zora. Holloway chuckled. I know more about you than you know about yourself. I'm pretty much you at this point, aren't I? So many good memories. You really had an incredible life, Zora. That's the issue. Zora nervously glanced at the dirt ground beneath them as the train picked up speed. You only steal the good memories, but that's unrealistic. You missed an important bad memory of Carthage's. The train's about to... At that moment, the steamless engine pulled out of the shed, leaving the cool darkness of the Tinker Center behind. The light of midday coated the train, causing every memory monster inside of it to squeal and scatter in the blinding light. The train lurched as its mechanics were abandoned and the shadows zipped away. Zora gripped a bar as she was thrust forward from the inertia and held on tightly until the feeling subsided. Sparks flew from the wheels as the steamless engine screeched to a stop. Holloway hadn't grabbed something in time. She sat collapsed against the front of the conductor's box, a thin line of blood dripping from her hair. Without her shadowy pets making her ominous, Zora wondered why she'd ever been afraid of her. How hard did you hit your head? Zora demanded of the motionless amnesiac. You better not have got amnesia once again and lost my memories. Oh, I'll get you back to the memory center. You have something in your head that I desperately need. Well, that's the entire story right there. It's a short one today. Previous versions of the story have been extremely long, but that ended up being too complicated to fit into this hour-long podcast, so you get a short one. This one was actually 10 pages. Most stories on this podcast are around 14 or 15. Now let's go over some of the behind the scenes. You may have realized that this is Oblivion's Library's first and only steampunk genre story, which steampunk, if you don't know, is basically tech if electricity had never been invented, and it's usually associated with alchemy and clocks and gears and cyborgs. It's a subgenre of sci-fi, steampunk is. This might be the only actual steampunk story that I've written. Most steampunk stories are based off of real-world years, like the British 1940s or the French 1910s, and they will take that year and location and make it larger than life, way more over the top than that year actually was, because it is fiction. It's not historic fiction, really. It's entirely fiction. So once again in Memoriam, this story is inspired off of the American 1880s. Big shout out to the TV show Gilded Age that I watched recently, acting as inspiration for the characters' outfits in this story. So once again, In Memoriam has its humble beginnings as a fanfiction of an entirely different series. And by fanfiction, I meant that I wrote it as completely separate from the series it was based on. The original series is not important. And how it got to a steampunk story of all things is beyond me. I literally don't know how. Like I said, I don't write steampunk, but this is just how it is, I guess. So a lot of what I do when I write stories is a lot of stories start out as fan fictions for other things, and then I think this story is pretty cool. It can stand on its own 2 feet. And so I changed the characters' names and personalities a bit, and what do you know? You've got an original story right there. And for this particular one, I decided to go out on a limb, took the original story and gender swapped everybody and ended up with 4 female leads, which honestly, I don't think I ever have a story with 4 female leads like that, so I kind of like that. So this story has 2 big things that inspired it. The first is actually my pastor at my church back home. At my home church in Texas, every Christmas Eve service, we light the Christ candle, and then spread that light around to every candle in the church, similar to what Taylor does here at the Christmas chapel. But after we sing Silent Night and all the carols, my pastor stands up to break the moment and tell everyone to blow their candles out. And I remember one year when he went up to the altar, I was really young, so I was hoping he wouldn't tell us to blow the candles out because I love the moment. And my pastor said that this moment on Christmas Eve with the candles was one of his favorite moments of the year. And he said he wished he could capture this moment and put it inside a capsule so he could think back on it when times got tough throughout the rest of the year. He said that story quite a long time ago, but for some reason I still remember him saying that, and I thought to myself, what if you could just capture moments and relive memories? And that became the basis for the story you just heard. The second inspiration for this story was, when you walk into a room and forget why you came in. There have been several stories that I've found of giving a supernatural reason behind why this silly little thing happens to everyone, and I gave mine. I figured, what if you walk into a room and you get bit by an animal that steals memories that you couldn't remember you'd seen after it darts away? And that became the basis for the memory monsters, which I'll talk about later. So let's talk about the title of this story. It's called Once Again in Memoriam. I wanted the title to have once again in it, implying that Zora's amnesia is a recurring theme in this world. But once again in Memoriam, it makes it sound like someone has died, because the in memoriam part. So in a way, it's the death of Zora, because she's waking up as an entirely new person. But also, since the story takes place in Memoriam City, the title can also mean, once again in the city of Memoriam, this and this is happening. So this story has one of the most interesting opening lines that I have written. We begin with a character who is just as new to this world as we are. That already sets the tone of this story, why is Zora, who lives in this world, new to this world? So let's talk about Zora for a little bit. I thought of her name randomly one day, so there's no symbolism behind her name. I thought it sounded cool. But I did learn about a real-life poet named Zora who lived in the 1920s, but the Zora from the story isn't connected to that. The Zora from this story is super scatterbrained. She always gets in trouble and loses her memories, and she probably has some serious brain damage by now. And she wears a white dress in this story, white of course symbolizing innocence and rebirth, because her losing her memories was not her fault at all, and her waking up with amnesia is her starting over, rebirth. Zora briskly gets introduced to Shades Ellipto, her partner at the memory center, who was clearly the opposite of Zora. I love their little dynamic they have going on. Shades is very blunt, not very eloquent, and takes things very seriously. She is a total introvert, but she is super overprotective of Zora. Shades wears black to contrast with Zora's white, because Shades is not innocent. She's got some trauma and some skeletons in her closet that she doesn't tell Zora about. And for the record, I do have Shades' backstory written out, but it doesn't apply to this story at all, so I left it out. So when you are designing female characters to go in a story, their clothes say a lot about them. Skirts are used to show girliness and youth, as well as they can mean old-fashioned, while women wearing pants means independence and modernity. The issue with time period pieces is that all women wear skirts until the 20th century, and a lot of the times their skirts contrast with what their personality actually is, at least in our modern understanding of it. When I was designing Zora, she's girly, she's innocent, she's playful, she would definitely wear a skirt. But everything about Shades screams, this person would never wear a skirt in their entire life. So I did some digging, and although this story is based off of 1880s fashion, I found a style of wide-legged pants that women began to wear in the 1910s. And they're pants that have a flap of fabric that can be buttoned one way or another. And button it one way, it becomes a skirt, and another way, it becomes pants. And I was like, oh my goodness, Shades would be all over that. Shades also wears sunglasses, even though I don't think sunglasses are steampunk at all. That's just been a founding thing of her character since I first thought her up. Sunglasses are used to hide a character's emotions a lot because they hide the eyes, and Shades has a lot of emotions to hide. Not only that, Shades wears a lot of non-feminine clothing. She wears suspenders, a men's jacket, and a fedora, which is used to symbolize feminism. And all of this ties to that mysterious past that doesn't come up here. Part of that is that Shades has been betrayed and abused in her past, and because of that, she doesn't trust the male species at all, except for Carthage. Shades is being the person that she never had for Zora, especially with Zora being so vulnerable all the time because she keeps losing her memory. So let's start at the story's beginning. Zora wakes up with amnesia. Shades interrogates her before exclaiming, "This is the third time this month." That already gives the audience some context. This is apparently a normal thing. And since Shades is apparently an expert at showing Zora around her life, we know she's just going to do it again, so we'll just follow the leader here. They rush to the elevator where they meet Director Carnegie, who is the director of the Memory Center. I wanted to connect this story more to the 1880s because, Zora and Shades they're not very steampunk-ish names. I wanted to connect to the historical figures of the time, so her name is Ambrosia Carnegie, and she is named after Andrew Carnegie to make her not only obvious that she's clearly in charge because she is named after a business tycoon, but also to make her appear kind and philanthropic. With Shades being so tough to warm up to, I wanted someone friendly to tell Zora about the Memory Center so she didn't feel so alienated all the time. So next we get to the Memory Center, which is decorated with a teal and copper motif. Shades tosses Zora her scrapbook, and Zora catches up on herself. The scrapbook was supposed to be a much bigger role in the story, with Zora finding photographs and adding on to it, but it ended up just being too weird, so it stays in her office and she glances at it a couple times. And this was one of the biggest things I got critiqued on. People liked the scrapbook because it told us who to trust and not to trust. Because Shades is super tough and might be lying, Carnegie is super nice but also might be lying, but this is Zora's own handwriting. She would not lie to herself, so we know we can trust what she's written down in the book. Shades introduces the Memory Center's technology with its capsules and memory solution. Now, as I've mentioned before on this podcast, my stories have an inciting incident at the beginning to kickstart the action, a midpoint in the middle of the story, a crisis moment, and then the climax at the end. But this story is twisted up in knots. It does not happen chronologically. The story actually starts at the midpoint. The halfway point is the very first scene with Zora waking up with amnesia, and because everything that happened before that is shown in the memory flashbacks that she sees. The inciting incident that kickstarts the entire story is Holloway getting amnesia from her own memory monsters. But you don't even see that scene. I had to just have Shades info dump and tell that part of the story. I hope that wasn't too confusing. The story plot being mixed up like this, that's not usually a wise way to tell a story, so please let me know if the plot was too confusing to follow. Earlier versions of this story had a lot more flashback scenes than just the one that we saw here. In Zora's flashbacks that she sees, we get 3 scenes. First introduces Carthage, who is Zora's older brother. He wears purple, a royal color, and is also named after an ancient city of Carthage, which makes him sort of ancient or reliable in contrast to scatterbrained Zora. Carthage works at the Tinker Center, where he builds things, and he describes a steamless engine. This train thing was a very last-minute addition to this story, but I think it fit with Holloway's theme really well, and it also gave the memory monsters something to do. Speaking of, they are in the next scene, the memory monsters, the creatures that steal memories when they bite and have the appearance of black cats with wings, so they're really just like 2 blinking eyes in the void. They're actually really smart and they're tame. Holloway just turned them into her own personal army because she felt like it. Here in the story, we meet Elusive Holloway, who is once again in Memoriam's villain. For her name, elusive means sneaky, like her memory monsters, and Holloway comes from the word hollow, because she is hollow once she gets amnesia. And this story utilizes a storytelling technique that I like to call the hero's dark side. Basically, for this technique, 2 characters go through the exact same experience, but have differing reactions to it. The ethical reactor becomes the struggling hero in the story, while the unethical reactor becomes the villain. In this story, that's Zora and Holloway. They're the pair here. Both Zora and Holloway lose their memories completely. Zora keeps herself in check and calmly pursues Holloway to get her memories back. But Holloway goes crazy, stealing memories from people to keep for herself, even though she knows they're not real and never happened to her. The thing that I love about the hero's dark side maneuver is how easily the roles could be flipped. That's the defining factor. Like, if Shades or Zora's scrapbook were absent from the story, there's a really good chance Zora could have ended up exactly like Holloway, and that's the real danger. If that's a definite possibility, then you know you've done it right. In this story, there's an ongoing theme of copper. We don't build nearly enough with copper on planet Earth. Only in Minecraft do we do that. It looks so cool. I think we should do that more in real life. Memoriam City, they're built on top of a copper mine, so they have a lot of copper, and Holloway embodies the copper theme a lot. At the beginning of the story, Holloway wears an orange-red copper dress, but after she gets amnesia and changes her demeanor, she changes her clothes to teal. This is because metal copper oxidizes when it comes into contact with water and it rusts to the teal color. Just think about Minecraft. Shades and Holloway wear teal to show they are weathered, they are rusted from their experiences. Holloway also has a sort of backwards cage symbolism. The first time you see her, she's surrounded by cages, but they're closed. She also wears a cage skirt, which is when you can see the hoops underneath the skirt that are giving the skirt its shape. She is metaphorically in a cage. And when she gets amnesia and goes crazy, you see Holloway again, and she's still in the cage's hallway. But all the cage doors are open, and Holloway isn't wearing the cage skirt anymore. Like she says, getting amnesia is a way of freeing herself, giving her the ability to make her own rules and choose her own past. But that freedom drives her insane and shows what could possibly happen if memory manipulating technology gets into the wrong hands. So in this scene, Carnegie asks Holloway, "Are you okay with taking other people's memories and having them even though you know they're fake?" And this ties into that thought experiment of, like, would you live the rest of your life in a simulation if it meant you'd be happy? Holloway says yes to this dilemma. Holloway gets desperate and gets her memory monsters to bite all the memories out of Zora, and Zora wakes up from the flashback into the present day to the actual midpoint of the story. Carthage calls on their old-fashioned telephones. Holloway is with him. She thinks she's Zora. Shades is just shamelessly listening in on the extension. Shades and Zora go to the Tinker Center to meet Holloway, but Shades hesitates, saying she can't go in. This is mostly because I wanted Zora to have to face Holloway alone, so it would be more evenly matched. And this also kind of ties into Shades' dark past as well. Like I said, I do have all that backstory figured out, but it's not important here. In the final confrontation, Carthage has a neon light he uses to fend off the memory monsters, which also connects him to Zora, who was doing the same thing with a lantern earlier in the story. Holloway takes Carthage's memories to learn how to drive the steamless train engine, but Holloway only likes happy memories, and that ends up being her downfall. She didn't take an embarrassing memory of Carthage's that would have let her make the escape. When the train hits the sunlight, the memory monsters get scared and scatter because they can't stand the light, and the train stops. Holloway hits her head and gets knocked out. Now, this is where the story ends. And normally, I hate when stories cut off before they're truly finished. But I really don't know what else I would add at the end. Like, obviously, Holloway's memory monsters are scattered, so she can't defend herself from them. She is knocked out. Holloway would get arrested. Zora would get her memories back from Holloway. Everything would go back to normal, minus the whole Holloway situation. And all of that information would just be boring extra added on to the end of the story. It doesn't need to be there, so I took it out. I think the story ends nicely how it does. I couldn't figure out an ending that went well with the story's pacing. All of those endings I could think about were too sappy or too like power of friendship. If you can think about something that you would like to have tacked on at the end there, just let me know. I would be fine with putting an ending on there. Alright, well, that's the entire story of Once Again Memoriam. It's been a nice vacation here on planet Hertagia. I am definitely enjoying myself, but now I need to catch a taxi to the next planet over, so I'm going to be doing that soon. Also, check out the Oblivion's Library Instagram and check out Wattpad for extra things. I really recommend that you check out the stuff I posted on Instagram for this story, if I could brag for just a little bit, because I drew out the character designs for this story. And you know how hard it is to draw dresses from the 1880s? Steampunk dresses at that? They're so detailed. There's so much color and like fine stitching and layers and stuff like that. And Holloway wears 2 dresses, so I had to draw her twice. So if you want to see those really cool dresses that I drew, check out Oblivion's Library on Instagram. And of course, you can listen live right here on WTOR Radio on Mondays at 8 p.m. Thank you so much for listening. This is Oblivion's Library, signing off. Take care, y'all.